Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. Happy Wednesday. I am hoping that I can get through a little bit of chapter 2 on the red tent here. This day has just been like flying by. I feel like I kind of went into this time warp. It started off slow and then now it's like almost 4:30. So I do have a call that I have to jump on at 5 o'clock here. So I probably only have about 20 minutes. This chapter is quite long, so I wasn't planning on getting through the whole chapter anyways, but I do have to cut it short. I recently hopped on board with Michael Jaco and Scott McKay with Operation Tomahawk. So I've got that happening tonight here. So I'm just going to try to get through as much of this as I can. I will post the links below for the intro and chapter 1 to follow along. And just a reminder again, there are a lot of words and, like names of people, names of places that I have a hard time with. I am not a good reader, like reading out loud. I've always struggled with that. So I'm pushing myself, right, to do this because this is just something, this is a book that I feel like I really wanted to share with people. And yeah, so I'm jumping out of my comfort zone and I am reading this out loud with you. I hope you guys are enjoying it. I've heard some feedback from people that they're really liking that I'm doing this. One of my best friends landed out the same time that I started this. She landed out reading the same book while she was away. So just, synchronicities that that this is something I should be doing right now. So, and again, just reminder, with the times that we're in, you are going to hear of things like polygamy with more than one wife, with pedophilia, men marrying like super young girls, even incest, right? So just, these are the times that this book is written in. So just bear with that part of this book. Okay, chapter 2. And again, this is the 10th edition. If any of you are following along with me, they may be slightly different from editions. I don't know that part for sure. And I just lost where that was. Okay, chapter 2. Those were not easy months. Rachel was imprecious. Leah sighed like a cow in labor. Lilfa sulked. Only Bilhah seemed untouched by the turmoil, spinning and weaving, pulling weeds from the garden and tending Adha's fire, which was always lit now, to comfort her chilled bones. Rachel spent as much time with Jacob as she dared, slipping away from the garden and the loom to find her beloved alone in the hills. Adha was too ill to keep her from such wild behavior, and Rachel refused to obey Leah, who had lost some of her stature now that the younger sister was to become bride and mother first. Those days in the fields with Jacob were Rachel's delight. He would look at me with wonder and said my beautiful aunt. His fingers in my hair, he made me stand in shade and then in the sun to see the different light play across my cheek. He wept at my beauty. He sang the songs of his family and told me about the beauty of his mother. Rachel said Jacob made up stories about how beautiful our sons would be too. Golden boys like me, he said, perfect boys who would be princes and kings. I know what they all thought, my sisters and the shepherds, but we never touched. Well, only once. He held me to his chest, but then he began trembling and pushed me away. After that, he kept his distance, which was fine with me. He smelled, much better than most of the men, but still the smell of goat and of man was overpowering. I would run home and bury my nose in coriander. Rachel boasted that she was the first to hear the story of Jacob's family. He was the younger of twin boys, making him his mother's heir. He was the prettier one, the clever one, Rebekah told her husband Isaac that Jacob was sickly in order to keep him at the breast for a year after she weaned the brother. Giving birth to the twins nearly killed Rebekah, who bled so much there was nothing left to sustain another life inside her. When she realized she had no daughters, she began whispering her stories to Jacob. Rebekah told Jacob that Esau's blessing was rightly his, for why else had Dinah made him the finer of the two? And besides, in her family, it was the mother's right to decide the heir. Isaac himself was the second-born son. Left to Abraham, Ishmael would have been patriarch, and Sarah had claimed her right and named Isaac instead. It was she who sent Isaac to seek a bride from among her family, as was the custom from the olden days. Even so, Jacob loved Esau and hated to do him any kind of harm. He feared that the God of Isaac his father and Abraham his grandfather would punish him for following his mother's words. He was haunted by a dream that woke him in terror, a dream in which he was utterly destroyed. Rachel stroked his cheek and told him that his fears were groundless. I told him that had he not followed his mother's bidding, he would never have found me. And surely the God of Isaac, who loved Rebekah's smile upon the love of Jacob for Rachel. This cheered him. He said, "He told me that I gladdened his heart like a sunrise. He said such pretty things." While Jacob spoke sweetly to Rachel, Leah suffered. She lost weight and neglected her hair, though through never her duties. The camp was always one row, clean, provisioned, and busy. The spinning never ceased, the garden flourished, and the herbs were plentiful enough to be traded in the village for new lamps. Jacob noticed these things. He saw what Leah did and learned that it was she who maintained order during the lean years while Laban moped. The old man was completely worthless. When Jacob had a question about whether the black-bearded trader from Aleppo was trustworthy or which of the boys to hire at shearing time, Leah was the one to ask about the flock, which ewes had borne in the previous year, what goats were the offspring of the black seer, and which of the dappled. Rachel, who had worked among the animals, could not tell one beast from the other, but Leah remembered what she saw and everything that Bilhah said. Jacob approached Leah with the same difference he showed to Adha, for after all, they were kinswomen. But he approached her far more often than necessary, or so it seemed to Zilpah. Jacob found a new question for the eldest daughters every day. Where should he pasture the kids in the spring? Had she any extra honey to barter for a likely looking ewe? Was she ready for the sacrifice of the barley harvest? He was always thirsty for the beer she brewed from wonderful recipes her mother had learned from an Egyptian trader. Leah answered Jacob's questions and poured his drink with her eyes averted. He had nearly tucked into her chest like a nestling bird. It was painful for her to look at him, and yet every morning when she opened her eyes, her first thought was of him. Would he come to speak to her again that day? Did he notice how her hand trembled when she filled his cup? Leah answered Jacob. Zilpah could not bear to be anywhere near them together. It was like being near rotting he-goats, she said. And they were so polite, they almost bent over not to see each other, lest they fall on top of each other like dogs in heat. Leah tried to ignore the desire in her own body, and Rachel was unaware of anything but the preparations for her wedding. But Zilpah saw lust everywhere she looked. To her, the whole world suddenly seemed damp with longing. Leah tossed and turned at night, and Zilpah had seen Jacob in the fields, leaning against a tree, his hands working his sex until he slumped over in relief. For a month before the wedding, Jacob stopped dreaming of battle or of his parents and brother. Instead, he spent his nights sleepwalking with each of the 4 sisters. He drank at the waters of the stream and found himself in Rachel's lap. He lifted a huge boulder to find Leah naked under it. He ran from the awful thing that chased him and fell exhausted into the arms of Bilhah, who had begun to grow the shape of a woman. He rescued Zilpah from the aconach tree, untangling her long hair from the branches where she was caught. He woke up every morning sweating, his sex aroused. He would roll off his blanket and squirm on the ground until he could stand without embarrassment. Zilpah watched as the tangle of Jacob and Rachel and Leah grew into a wedge she could use. For as much as she loved Leah, Zilpah had never cared for the lovely Rachel. That's what Zilpah always called her. Ah, and here comes the lovely Rachel, she would say, she would say, vinegar in her voice. She knew there wasn't much she could do to stop Jacob from becoming the family patriarch, and indeed she was as impatient for children as anyone else. Still, she wanted to make this river flow in a direction of her choosing. Zilpah also wished to make the lovely Rachel suffer just a little. Zilpah suspected that Rachel feared her wedding night and encouraged her to confess every worry. The older girl sighed and shook her head in sympathy as Rachel revealed how little she knew about the mechanics of sex. She had no expectation of pleasure, only of pain, so Zilpah told her nervous sister that the shepherd spoke of Jacob's sex as a freak of nature. "Twice the size of that of any normal man," she whispered, demonstrating an impossible length between her hands. Zilpah took Rachel up to the highest pasture and showed her the boys having their way with their ewes, who bleated pitifully and bled. The older sister commiserated with the trembling girl, whispering, "Poor thing," as she stroked Rachel's hair. "Poor female thing." And that was why, on the day of the wedding, Rachel panicked. Jacob's chaste admiration had been pleasant, but now he would demand everything of her, and there would be no way to refuse. Her stomach rebelled as she retched. She pulled out handfuls of hair. She ran her fingernails down her cheeks until she drew blood. She begged her sisters to save her. Rachel wept as we tried to dress her for the banquet. Leah said she cried, claiming she was unready and unwilling and too small for her husband. She even tried that trick with the crushed berries, lifting her skirt and whining that Jacob would kill her if he found moon blood in the nuptial bed. I told her to stop behaving like a child, for she wore a woman's belt. But Rachel wailed and fell off her knees and begged her sister to take her place under the bridal veil. "Zilpah says you will do it," she cried. I was struck dumb, Leah remembered, for of course Zilpah was right. I had not permitted myself to imagine such a thing, that it might be me with him that night. I could barely admit it to myself, much less to my sister, who was not so lovely at the moment, her eyes red from crying, her cheeks streaked with blood and berry juice. First I said no. He would know at once, for no veil could hide the difference of our height. He would refuse to have me, and then I would be damaged goods, unmarriageable, and nothing to be done but sell me for a slave. But all the while I protested, my heart pounded in its own. Yes, Rachel asked me to do what I wanted more than anything in life. So even as I argued, I agreed. Ada was too ill to help dress the bride that morning, so Zilpah took charge of the plot, rubbing Leah's hands and feet with henna, drawing the kohl around her eyes, covering her with baubles. Rachel sat in a corner, hugging her knees to her chest and shivering as Leah prepared for what was meant to be her wedding night. I was happier than I have ever been, said Leah, but I was also filled with dread. What if he turned away from me in disgust? What if he ran out of the tent and shamed me forever? But something in me believed that he would embrace me. It was a simple banquet with few guests. 2 flute players from the village came and went quickly. One of the shepherds brought a gift offering of oil, which he left as soon as he had filled his belly. Laban was drunk from the start, his hands under poor Ruth's dress. He stumbled over his feet when he led Leah to Jacob's side. The bride crouched low under her veil, circled the groom 3 times in one direction, 3 times in another. Zilpah served the meal. I thought the day would never end, Leah said. I could not be seen through my veil, nor could I see out clearly. But how could Jacob not know it was me? I waited in misery for him to expose me, to jump up and claim that he had been swindled. But he did not. He sat beside me, close enough for me to feel the warmth of his thigh against mine. He ate lamb and bread and drank both wine and beer, though not enough to make him sleepy or stupid. Finally, Jacob stood and helped me to my feet. He led me to the tent where we would spend our 7 days with Laban's following, hooting and wishing us sons, Leah remembered. Jacob did not move toward me until it had fallen silent outside. Then he removed my veil. It was a beautiful garnet embroidered with many colors and worn by generations of brides who had lived through 100 wedding nights filled with pleasure, violence, fear, and delight and disappointment. I shuddered, wondering which destiny would be mine. It was not fully dark inside the tent. He saw my face and showed no surprise. He was breathing heavily. He took off the rest of my clothes, removing first the mantle from my shoulders, untying my girdle, and then helping me as I stepped out of my robes. I was naked before him. My mother told me my husband would only lift up my robes and enter me still wearing his. But I was uncovered, and then in that moment, so was he. His sex pointing at me, I looked like a faceless Asherah. It looked like a faceless Asherah. This was such a hilarious idea. I might have laughed out loud had I not been able to breathe. Okay, so only because I need to get going, and I think this is probably a good place to stop. I hope that you guys are enjoying this book with me. I would love to hear from you down below what you're thinking. Like I said, I encourage you to go back and catch the intro as well as the first chapter. If there's any of you that have read this book, I would love to hear from you as well. Like I spoke about in the intro, this book was, I first read this book before I had children, so over 13 years ago, and it was just life-changing for me. So I am looking forward to continually diving into this with you and hearing what you guys think about it. I hope you guys are having an amazing week, and we will chat soon.